Welcome to another monthly wrap up. I can't believe it's the end of March already. I literally can't believe it. We read 8 books this month, which I did not expect because one of these books is literally 800 pages. So I just did not expect to read as many alongside that, but here we are. So let's go through them, and as always I'm going to do a little book of the month situation at the end, which I started last month, and it's basically where I just pick my favourite book from that month, almost like an honorary mention to that book. So that'll be at the end, but let's start with the first book that I read in March. I actually read majority of this book last month, but I finished it in March, so we're going to include it in here, and that's Shatter Me. I finally got around to reading this. I feel like this has been on my TBR for so long, and I really enjoyed this. This is such an easy, fast-paced read. So this is set in a dystopian world, and it follows our main girl, Juliet, who basically has this, I don't want to call it a power, but she has this thing, I guess it is a power. She kind of has this power where she can't touch people because otherwise they die. Her touch is basically lethal. So we start the book with her locked up because of this power that she's got. And there's this thing called the re-establishment, which is like the high up society, and they basically want to recruit her to do all their dirty work for them, and she really doesn't want to do it. She doesn't want to hurt people. So it basically follows her and how she's kind of going to get out of this situation. I really like how this is sort of poetically, lyrically written. Just the way that she describes things and her feelings throughout, it's just so poetic, and I really like that. I also really like the strike throughs, because this book has a lot of strike throughs as if she's writing it and she's made a mistake and she's like crossed it out, and I think the use of that was so clever in this, because you'd see what she'd initially think and then she'd kind of correct herself into what she should think or how she should feel, and I just thought that was so interesting. We really learned a lot about her and who she actually is inside and her actual feelings rather than what she thinks she should be feeling or thinking, if that makes sense. I really like that part of it. I will say the things I've heard from this book is that Warner, who is like the bad guy in this, I've heard so many people say how much they absolutely love him, and I'm not gonna lie, this first book I do not see it. I did not see it at all. I think I dislike him so much in this. I think he would have to have such a massive character arc, like an amazing character arc, for me to change my mind. I do want to carry on this series, so we shall see how that develops. But I really didn't like him. I really didn't like him, and I know we're not meant to, but I was quite surprised based on what I'd heard about him and how much people love him. I was quite surprised at how he was in this first book, so we shall see. I ended up rating this 4 out of 5 stars. So a really solid book, I really enjoyed, and it was such a quick and easy read. It is a YA, so that probably explains why it's so quick and easy. And I do really want to carry on this series at some point. I need to get the other ones though, I haven't got them yet. But I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued by this whole series and to see what happens. Okay, moving on. So the next two are actually part of a video that I did. I did a reading vlog, reading the highest rated book on my whole TBR and the lowest rated. So the next two were my highest and lowest rated books on my whole TBR. So my highest rated was no surprise to me. This is probably one of my most anticipated reads that I had on my TBR, and that's Binding 13 by Chloe Walsh. I have such mixed feelings about this book, and I will explain why, but that made it really difficult to rate because there were things that I absolutely loved about this book, but there were also things that kind of brought the rating down for me. So I absolutely love Shannon and Johnny and their story. If I was to relay the story to you in the plot, I love the plot, I love the idea of the plot, I love it. I think the thing that I struggled with this was how it was written, and I'm not saying that it was specifically written badly because it wasn't. It just felt quite rambly throughout the whole thing, which is fine, but then when you add the fact that I thought it was quite repetitive, and the way that people were described was really repetitive, and certain scenes I also felt like were just repeated when they didn't really need to be. I do also think, considering this book is literally 800 pages, we didn't need those repeated scenes, and I feel like we still could have got the idea of their relationship and them two as individual characters. We could have still got that point across in less pages. And without repeated scenes, if that makes sense. But I do really like Shannon and Johnny. I love how they're so opposite in a lot of ways. Like, she comes from a poorer family and he's very well off. He's very much in the limelight and this sports star, and she's kind of been overlooked her whole life. I love those sort of characteristics and how they're opposing each other. But then I also really like how he's protective of her and how they're just automatically drawn to each other, and he just really wants to protect her and make her life easier at school and stuff. And yeah, I do really like them together, and I think those two as characters are characters that will stick with me, and they are characters that I have thought about since I finished reading this. I think also bear in mind that I had such high expectations going into this book, so just keep that in mind with my rating and everything. But I ended up giving this a 3.5 stars, which I really struggled with a rating for, to be honest, because as you could probably tell when I'm ranting about it, I absolutely loved parts of it, but I also didn't really get on with other parts. So I have I have a lot of mixed feelings. Also, this is very slow burn, very slow burn. Like, I felt like I was waiting the entire time for them to get together. And when I say it's slow burn, it's slow burn. I've also just realised I haven't really said what this is about. This is basically a high school sports rugby romance. I would say check the trigger warnings for this one just because it does deal with some harder topics like bullying and toxic family situations. So I would say just double check the trigger warnings if you're wanting to read this. But what I did also like about this is that it's about first love, but there's also a lot of deeper sort of things going on behind the scenes, which I really like because it just gives the book a bit more substance. Okay, moving on from Binding 13. Then I read the lowest rated book on my TBR, and that was A Twisted Love Story by Samantha Downing. Now, even though this was the lowest rated, this still had 3.2, I think it was. So I wouldn't say that that was that low of a rating. This is ratings on Goodreads, by the way. I rated this 2 stars. This book just wasn't for me. It just wasn't for me. I was expecting this to sort of be a psychological thriller about a married couple, and that sort of book where you're reading and you're like, who can we trust, and can we trust anything that these people are saying? That's the vibe I got from this book, but it wasn't like that. It was much more of a crime mystery, slow unrevealing of little puzzle pieces. I just felt really disconnected from the story and really disconnected from the characters. It basically follows a really toxic on and off couple, and they do like really petty but extreme things to get each other's attention, and they're also hiding some big secret that happened in the past, and there's now a detective on their case, so they've sort of got to work together to hide their past secrets. I thought a lot of this book was telling instead of showing, which I feel quite jarring to read sometimes because it feels like a lot of information just being thrown at you. And I feel like for a thriller there needs to be a lot more show not tell, just to make it more fast paced and sort of engaging. I feel like I was also really expecting some jaw-dropping twists at the end, and it just never came. It was much more mystery and sort of slowly unraveling the mystery. So I ended up rating this 2 stars, and I just don't think it was for me. Moving on to The 7 Year Slip by Ashley Poston. This is one of the cutest books I've ever read. Ever. This is a romance, but it's also got an element of time travel in, because it basically follows our main girl, and she lives in an apartment that can move back or forward 7 years in time, and one day it does move back in time 7 years, and there's this random man stood in her kitchen, and she's like, what on earth is this random man doing in my kitchen? And he's actually from 7 years in the past, and they basically start spending time together. But what I really love about this concept is that even though he is there 7 years in the past, he's also somewhere out in the world in the present, and she doesn't know whether she'll ever cross paths with him in present time. It's just so good. It's so good. I love the way it's written. It's one that I kind of wish I'd annotated just because of how many cute lines and quotes that there were. And it's a book that literally had me giggling and kicking my feet. I was so excited when I was reading this book. It was honestly so cute. And there were also some harder topics like grief that we just dealt with so beautifully in this. And it just took it from being just a romance to something deeper, and I just love that. I love it. And I rated this 5 stars. It's my first 5-star I've had in a while, I feel like. And I definitely want to get The Dead Romantics, which is Ashley Poston's other book. Just reading this one, I'm like, I need everything she's ever written. And then I read None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. This is a psychological thriller. It basically follows 2 women who meet because their birthday's the same day, and they go out to the same place to celebrate their birthday, and they end up meeting. And one of these women has their podcast, and the other one persuades her to put her on this podcast. So it basically follows these 2 women making this podcast, and one of the women is a bit kind of weird from the get-go, and she's just telling her life story basically. But it takes a bit of a dark turn, a lot of secrets come out, and yeah, it's just a really good, interesting psychological thriller. I think this is really different to Lisa Jewell's other books, because I feel like in her other books there's a crime from the get-go, whereas this, you just didn't know where it was going, which was quite fun to read. You just didn't know. You had no idea where the plot was going. It wasn't like, oh, there's a disappearance and we need to find where this person has gone. It was just more like, what on earth is going on? What twists and turns are we going to take? I will also say I was kind of waiting for a massive twist to happen, even though Lisa Jewell doesn't really do that in her books. Her books are a lot more sort of unravelling the puzzle pieces and sort of finding out what's happening. But I don't know why, I just really felt that this was going to be different, in that there was going to be a massive jaw-dropping twist at the end. But that just wasn't the case, which is fine. It was still good. And there were definitely still mini twists here and there. The thing that I really liked about this book was the podcast setup and how when you were reading it, it literally felt like you were watching a Netflix podcast, because they basically have little excerpts here and there and it's set up like a podcast. So it starts off explaining what we would be seeing on the screen, and then it has a person talking and it's just dialogue, which I really liked. And I liked that it sort of broke up the normal paragraphs as well. So I ended up rating this 4 out of 5 stars. It was just a very solid psychological thriller and I really enjoyed it when I was reading it. Next up we have Flawless by Elsie Silver. This is the first one in the Chestnut Springs series and this is basically just a cowboy spicy romance. And the way that I had high expectations for this, just based on how much people absolutely love this whole series, and I was kind of like, yeah, I think I'll like it, but I don't know, like, is it going to live up to all the hype? The way that this book literally consumed me for that 2 or 3 days that I was reading it. I was watching bull riding videos on YouTube. I was trying to really get into this world. The way I want a cowboy now, honestly, after reading this. Can somebody please find me a cowboy? It's just such a fun, easy, light-hearted read, and I literally went to go get the next one almost straight away because I just think I'm going to really like this series. I just think these are going to be such fun, easy reads that I can just pick up when I need something a bit light-hearted. And yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed. I had a really good time and I rated this one 4 stars. It was just so fun. So then I read Bodies by Christine Ann Foley. This is actually a proof copy that I was so kindly sent and I was so intrigued by this. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't even know how to explain it properly. This basically focuses on a woman and her different relationships with men as she's growing up. I think we start off when she's about 16, 17, and we basically learn about all these men and how they've treated her. This is unlike anything I've ever read. The writing style is very, almost like a diary and almost quite blunt and shocking at times. It's very much like she's just recounting her experiences with these men and she's just telling us about them. But the way that it's written is so blunt that it makes you kind of like double take almost. You're like, what have I just read? What have I just read? And this was honestly so twisted in a lot of ways, but also so relatable and real. And how the author has done that, I do not know. I literally do not know how she's made a character so sort of dark and twisted, but also so real and relatable in so many ways. I literally don't even know how she's done that. It was so interesting. It's unlike anything I've read. I rated it 4 stars. I do think this is a book that I will think about again. Even since I've stopped reading it, I'm still thinking about it and I'm still like, what on earth did I just read? But in the best way possible. She was just so unhinged and flawed, but also really likeable. And yeah, I really enjoyed, and as you can see, I was tabbing it because some of the quotes in here are just so good and so relatable. They're things that I read that I was like, I literally thought I was the only one that felt that, or that experienced that, or did that. And she's written them in such a way that I'm like, that's exactly how I felt, or that's exactly how this situation happened. And I just had to tab it because it was so good. I will also just say check the trigger warnings for this one as well, because I feel like there would be quite a few, and I'm pretty sure Goodreads will have them in the review section. So please just check the trigger warnings before you pre-order this or anything. It's coming out 4th of July in case you want to know. And then our last book of the month. I literally cannot even believe that I've been lucky enough to receive this and to be able to read it early, and that's Funny Story by Emily Henry. I literally nearly screamed at the postman when he dropped this off at my house. I nearly screamed in his face. And I really enjoyed this book. If you're looking for a really fun, light-hearted rom-com, this is going to be the book for you. It's got everything that I love in an Emily Henry book. And I just really enjoyed. I really enjoyed. I love the whole concept. So basically, this follows Daphne and Miles. This is so confusing to explain. Daphne's fiance basically breaks up with her to be with Miles's girlfriend, if that makes sense. So then Daphne ends up moving in with Miles because she has nowhere else to go. So it's a roommate situation. And then they basically sort of as a joke decide to tell their exes that they're basically dating. So there's a bit of the fake dating trope in there as well. And there's also a bit of the found family trope in here, which I really love. It also really made me giggle at times as well. I think in the last 150 or so pages is when we see sort of the deeper messages that are going on throughout the book. And that's partly what I absolutely love about Emily Henry's books, is that she's created these flawed and real characters that do have a lot going on, but that also are learning as they go. I just thought the end sort of messages that we got were just so nice. And yeah, I just really enjoyed it. It was so fun. I actually only finished this yesterday, so I'm not 100% set on my rating yet. I'm kind of stuck between a 4 and a 4.5. So I'm just gonna sit with that rating and see how I feel about this, but it's somewhere there. But it was really good and I feel very lucky that I got to read it early. And this cover is literally stunning. Like, with the little window, I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed. And that was the last book that I read this month. So that brings us to the end of this video. So for book of the month, my favourite book, the book that stood out to me the most was, drumroll please, The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Boston. It's so good. It's so good. I just absolutely love this. I had so much fun reading it and it's definitely one that I've thought about a lot since I put it down, and I feel like I will continue to think about it. And just the concept I love, the characters I love. It's just all around good vibes and a fun time. So that's my book of the month. Please let me know what your favourite book that you read this month was as well. And thank you so much for watching this video and I will see you in my next one.